Thank you all for joining us for today's Integration Evolved webcast series, Enabling Hybrid Composition On-Premise and Beyond, presented by Rick Garibay. My name is Amy Nelson, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for Neudesic and the moderator for today's webcast. This webcast is presented by Rick Garibay, Neudesic's General Manager of the Connected Systems Practice. We are very excited to have him present for us this morning. Today's webcast is a part of our Integration Evolved series. We will be hosting the next webcast, Full Circle, Maximize Customer Experience with Dynamic CRM Application Integration, on April 19th. We will be sending out more information about this webcast along with this webcast recording. If you are logged on, you should all be able to see the title slide that states Neudesic. There was a brief intro earlier regarding features within Live Meeting. To briefly recap, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the session by typing them in. To ask a question, click on the Q&A verbiage located on the toolbar on the top left side of your screen. Type your question, then click the Ask button. Please note that all questions will be held until the end. We will also be using the seating chart feature within Live Meeting. Changing your feedback color within this tool provides feedback to the presenter. To provide feedback, click on the feedback menu found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Select your feedback color. Your seat in the conference center will display your selected color. Lastly, this webcast is being recorded and will be available via the Neudesic website. We will email you when the link is available. If everyone is ready, please make sure your seat color is green, and at this time I'd like to turn our presentation over to Rick.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy. Let me just go ahead and share my desktop here, and we will get started. Can everybody see my desktop and hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Rick.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you here this morning to discuss building hybrid composite solutions on the Microsoft Application Integration Platform. This is the first webcast. It's part of a new webcast series called Integration Evolved. We have webcasts scheduled through the spring and beginning of summer. The next webcast in this series is Maximizing Customer Experience with Dynamic CRM Application Integration, driving innovation with SAP on-premise and beyond, and EDI, the reports of my death, have been greatly exaggerated. The purpose of this webcast series is really to highlight the exciting new capabilities that are surfacing within the Microsoft platform that are really enabling composite solutions like never before. And we're going to talk about exactly what we mean by composite solutions and why the industry thinks they're important and why as technologists we should be focusing on them. But the reality is that there's a number of different pain points that customers have in terms of enabling those compositions. And this webcast series is really focused on providing a pragmatic lens through which to understand how to enable some of the key scenarios. And we see a ton of opportunities that customers have to really light up their CRM and SAP environments, and we see a ton of EDI out in the field working with customers every day as well. And so the good news is the tooling is getting better and better for working within those environments, and you'll want to be sure to register for those upcoming sessions throughout the rest of the spring and early summer. A little bit about myself. I run the Connected Systems Development practice at Neudesic. We focus on the Microsoft integration stack. So BizTalk Server, Windows Server App Fabric, Azure Service Bus, WCF, Workflow, and our own Neuron ESB product is really kind of where we focus, and really working with customers, typically in the enterprise and consumer space, to enable distributed solutions that are transformational and really add direct business value to our customers. I'm a 5-time Microsoft MVP in Connected Systems, and sit on a number of different advisory boards with Microsoft, including the Microsoft Business Platform Technology Advisors group, which is really a direct feedback mechanism to the product teams, often sharing the voice of the customer and feedback that we get, and really working with Microsoft ahead of release to make sure that the features and capabilities that they're releasing are aligned with the needs in the market and the field. Pleased to be releasing my first book, Windows Server App Fabric Cookbook by Packed Pub, which will actually be shipping next month. In addition, I'm also the president and co-founder of the Phoenix Connected Systems User Group. We focus on distributed technologies, including but not exclusive to Azure, .NET, WCF, BizTalk, and Workflow. And you can always catch up with me on Twitter or on my blog. So the topics I want to talk about today are really taking a look at some of the trends that we're seeing in terms of how we develop solutions, both within the enterprise and beyond. Some of the challenges associated with that, and really kind of aligning with what users and customers really are asking for today from the application developer and architect, including achieving performance and scale both on-premise as well as just in the cloud, and tools for developing composite solutions, whether they reside on-premise, in the cloud, or the combination thereof. And that will kind of be a good pivot to the last topic, which will really be how do you go about enabling these composite hybrid solutions, where you might have some assets that live on-premise for a variety of different reasons, regulatory, team maturity, organizational psychology, but you have some assets that are in the cloud or looking for opportunities to offload some of these workloads to the cloud. We'll talk about how you can actually enable those types of scenarios today. So let's start off with kind of a look at where we find ourselves today. Gartner has published a paper which includes a number of strategic planning assumptions that revolve around the topic of composition. And what they say is that by 2015, so in the next 2 years, 80% of transformational systems implemented by mid-size and large enterprises will be compositions. What does that mean? Well, if we look at the strategic imperative that they also provide in terms of guidance, what they're basically saying is that compositions should be used to streamline interactions with strategic providers of goods and services in order to control transaction costs, maximizing information flow, and improve process latency. So really what we're seeing is, as a result of the proliferation of the web, of cloud computing, and as hardware and resources reach commodity levels, what we're seeing is, as a result of the maturity in terms of messaging infrastructures, the ability to actually start to think about our business processes in a manner that spans beyond just the organizational boundaries, but really making use of the best capabilities and the best providers and vendors available, is really where organizations are shifting to maximize efficiency and really streamline their operations, their business operations. There's an interesting landmark paper that was written by a gentleman of the name of Ronald Coase, who is a world-renowned economist. And he has a few theories that he posits as part of the theory of a firm. And those theories include an enterprise cannot be the most efficient source of goods and services that it needs. It should really only self-source goods for goods, source goods for which it is the most efficient supplier. And real or perceived transaction costs can distort the consideration of supplier efficiency and the reduction of transaction costs to leverage the most efficient providers of goods and services is really kind of the focus. Now, this paper was written in the late 60s. And basically what's addressing is the fact that as an organization really kind of moves into the niche of what it provides, what value, the goods and services that it provides, there's a number of foundational things that are required in order to keep the organization running, whether that's things like finance, HR, inventory management, supply chain management, patient management, that the organization may or may not be the best suited to actually supply. And so it really is kind of a challenge that I think is very relevant in today's day and age to really look at how organizations are assembling and aligning their operations in the most efficient and effective way. So turns out that there's kind of a perfect storm for this whole notion of composition really being the main focus of how we build applications and solutions. No longer kind of being in the business of creating these monolithic applications, or even client server where we have maybe a two-tier architecture, and we're maybe consuming a database or a couple of different databases. The evolution brought to us by service orientation, and at present day really being focused on hybrid and cloud computing, is one in which the traditional boundaries of the enterprise have really been blurred, right? And the opportunity for organizations is to really take advantage of the best vendors, the best partners, the best capabilities in order to enable the business outcomes that they're seeking. If we look at some of the disruptive aspects that have enabled these trends, really what you see on the left is what's happened is the cost of computing has just gone down drastically, right? Now, the effort in maintaining your infrastructure, your data centers, hasn't necessarily been in proportion to the reduction in overall procurement costs, but the fact is that when you look at processing, memory, storage costs today versus even 5-10 years ago, it's pretty dramatic, and that has really enabled commercial public cloud providers to really commoditize their investments in that infrastructure and the know-how to be able to start to offer some of these public and commercial cloud computing offerings. On the left-hand side, what you see is as a result of virtualization, the ability to enable these service-level agreements in the cloud as well as on-premise, the ability to scale elastically, and in addition, the application platform, the tools, the languages keeping pace. What we're really seeing is the next evolution from service orientation, right, into truly building composite applications, which at their core are distributed, right? If you look at mobility, which has really become a central force in consumer computing, every mobile application by design is distributed, right? It is a composition of one or more resources that are available in a service-oriented manner. You look at the emphasis on Windows 8 and Metro. Metro applications are inherently composition. They are inherently service-oriented. So we're not just seeing a fad here, right? We're seeing a trend towards composition, and as a result, these solutions being service-oriented, just in the same way that 10 years ago you didn't really talk about web applications being data-driven, right? It was assumed, it was implied. Such is the case today for a new breed of applications, whether you're building web applications, mobile applications, traditional desktop applications. These are now inherently compositions that are born of a foundation around service orientation. There's a great model that Gartner has that's focused on how organizations might model their investments. So if you think about some of the topics I just mentioned, mobility, desktop, web, etc., those have different purposes and different value that they bring to an organization depending on the context and the purpose. And so the model is actually pretty intuitive. It's based on 3 layers that kind of represent the pace of change or the pace of innovation. System of record, systems of differentiation, and systems of innovation. Let's actually take a look at that a little bit closely. when we talk about systems of record, what we're talking about is the traditional systems that run the business, right? These are typically referred to in hallway conversation as the cost of doing business, right? They might have been commercially acquired. They rarely provide a competitive differentiator, right? We're really usually talking about systems that are responsible for things like managing HR records and payroll, finance, master data management, things that we take for granted but are a core part of the business. And again, as a cost of doing business, accuracy and uptime are absolutely critical. And so it turns out that there's a pretty significant friction, right, in making changes to those systems. So organizations that are looking to draw a distinction between themselves and their competitors really struggle to enable these systems to really, perform that level of differentiation. And it's that level of differentiation, or that layer of differentiation, that really is how we grow the business, right? This is what kind of sets FedEx apart from UPS, or Pepsi apart from Coke, and you can draw your own comparisons, right? It's kind of the how we do things here, right? And this is where you might get into things like CRM as a differentiator, a customized supply chain management approach, or an approach to inventory management, or any slew of business processes that kind of require a different focal point, right? They kind of require different tools. The rate of innovation has to be a lot quicker than that of systems of record. And then last but not least, the systems of innovation. And when you look at mobility and you look at a lot of the web applications today, these are really kind of the end interfaces that the end customer interacts with from a brand identity perspective. It's high touch with customers, right? It kind of defines the product, the why behind an organization. And if you look at it through this lens, from a systems of record perspective, we're really talking about some of these ERP type systems like JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, custom homegrown systems of records, SAP. Systems of differentiation, right? We're looking at things like portals and content management, really enabling this collaboration. Lightweight enterprise service buses that now allow you to expose some of these critical assets in a system of record, but actually then compose those assets with other aspects, other assets within the organization that really drive that value. And that's where you start to get into event-driven architectures, right? When a order is received by Amazon.com, there's a number of different things that happen. The system of record from an inventory management and a financial processing standpoint are critical parts of that composition, but there's a number of other things that are involved that enable interaction with the customer, the ability to share purchases on Twitter or Facebook, and really kind of differentiate that whole customer experience from the competition. And then looking at systems of innovation, right? We're looking at mobility, web APIs, right? No longer requiring the need to actually be an employee to be able to get a list of products or witness trends in terms of pricing, or make a decision in terms of when to go to San Francisco in a car versus a bus based on the congestion downtown. But APIs that are now being made available as a new imperative, right, for being able to share information, to enable consumers and customers in a very transparent manner, is a lot of what we're talking about, and that's where web-oriented architecture tends to come into play as well. So a lot of times what we're seeing is traditional SOAP investments if you kind of think about an iceberg, right? Under that iceberg is a lot of investment in SOAP and EDI and EAI and a lot of these traditional mechanics, but REST and really looking at how to consume these assets as resources through web-oriented architectures is kind of these tips of the iceberg becoming very, very prevalent, and certainly a social aspect to that. So when you think about these layers, it's really about the rate of change, right? So in systems of record, organizations are very reluctant to make significant changes. But unlocking the assets that exist in those systems of record such that they can be composed within systems of differentiation and systems of innovation is really what the enterprise is focusing on right now. And what we'll see is that the tooling has actually evolved significantly to keep pace with these different layers as well. So to kind of round out the picture, if we look at the advancements in computing from an application perspective, what we really see is that now, we're moving beyond this idea of enterprise middleware, right? Where I need to integrate maybe SIP with CRM or some other custom system, and that's kind of the focal point. And the reality is that, each turn of the crank, right, to enable that is fraught with expense and resources, and the business value may or may not be realized or ever really visible necessarily to the customer, to this era really of hybrid compositions or software plus services, right, where the tooling under that the surface is still very much necessary and very much at play, but the ability to actually expose, compose, and consume those assets through compositions is really where the focus is, and where the tooling, if you look at the last even 2 years, has really changed to adapt to these new models. So when we talk about composite applications, what we're really talking about is most organizations already have existing assets, whether they live at the system of record, system of differentiation, or new assets that are being built around systems of innovation. And so the key really is that when you're thinking about a business process, when you're putting together a plan for enabling some kind of a business outcome, there's an inventory that needs to take place in terms of really understanding what you have, and then what you should build in a manner that is inherently interoperable, right? And so we're going to look through, in the demos, we're going to look at a sample composite application. There's a reflection of some of the best practices and capabilities for building these hybrid solutions, where you have some assets that reside on premise, some that might reside in the cloud, and other partners and parties that may be anywhere in the world. And so we'll actually look at a travel and hospitality theme with a fictitious restaurant reservation system, where I may have a number of different tasks that take place as part of the operational aspect of accepting a reservation, right, or processing a reservation, reservation management, if you will. So for accepting a reservation, I'm basically leveraging some existing assets that might be databases, might be services, might be other applications, and I'm stitching those together into the ability to actually receive a reservation. I then might have to add some additional capabilities, build some additional services, some additional compositions that then enable me to confirm a reservation, right? So provide that feedback to the customer that we've accepted your reservation, and we're going to go ahead and give you a confirmation to let you know that we've received the reservation, and we're going to make sure that we can meet that. And then lastly, you want to be able to process that reservation and deliver that end service to the customer. And there's obviously a number of architectural aspects, both functional and non-functional, to consider here. Things like eventual consistency, and the fact that a reservation might get canceled, the customer that makes the reservation may not actually show up, and so those are all forces that need to be reconciled. But at its most fundamental level, what we really are looking at is the ability to each of those dots representing different assets, new and existing, that are stitched together into one cohesive whole that might be reservation management, right? And what might not be obvious from the slide is that those assets may reside anywhere, right? They may all be within your data center, but more and more pressure is being felt by CIOs and CTOs to really take advantage of some of the economies of scale that the cloud provides. So more and more, that might mean that the assets are moving certain workloads off premise to the cloud, or really looking at what vendor is best suited to actually be able to manage the acceptance of reservations. Should I roll my own email notification system, or should I outsource that to someone that can actually expose their APIs in a way that I can compose and consume them accordingly? So that's really kind of what we're talking about when we talk about composite applications, is there are assets that are in existence both on-premise and in the cloud. I need to understand how to expose those assets, which may include applications that were never designed to do anything more than what their original purpose was, right? So that might reflect some effort to actually expose those interfaces, either using legacy or traditional means. I then compose those, right? I stitch those together into my reservation management operation, my workflow, and there's some effort involved in that, right? There is some cost of doing so, but if you're thinking in terms of the business outcomes and the value that you're delivering, then the reality is that as a result of that effort, your composition is now consumable across a variety of different assets, whether that's traditional web applications, desktop apps, packaged apps, or mobile apps. And so that's really kind of where I think we're heading, and we've actually seen this traction for quite some time. But the proliferation of mobile devices, cloud computing, and the new web really exert this composition model on developers of any size, organizations across verticals. So what are some of the business benefits of building composite applications? Well, obviously the whole idea here is to be able to do more with less, right? You don't want to reinvent the wheel every time you need to look up inventory or log a transaction, right? You want to actually build these compositions once and be able to enable multi-channel access. That means that customers on their phone, their desktop, their tablets, they're demanding the ability to be able to interact with your applications across a variety of different channels. You want to really put some governance around this stuff, right? So the ability to have a 360-degree view of your customer, patient, order, whatever your domain within your organization looks like, is really one of the core promises of composition, right? So if you look at resisting the reinventing, right, of those integrations every time, what you get to is kind of a single version of the truth, right? And with that, then you can enable efficient real-time business processes, right, which then allow the business to actually get a really good view on what's happening, right, because you have a set of services and compositions that are in service to the business. And with that, you basically have the ability to get real-time insight, right? Not waiting until the next day or the next week or the next month, but really understand what's happening intrinsically inside of the business from an operational perspective to make those decisions in a real-time manner. And then the obvious one, obviously, is the agility that brings, right? You're building applications and solutions with change in mind, right? With adaptability in mind. Component services that are built for change, built for interoperability is really one of the foundational benefits that any business will glean from thinking in terms of compositions. On the IT side, right, we want things like data consistency, right? We want to reduce the management costs of managing different applications, data stores, and systems. When there's a change that is requested in order to remain competitive or address a customer need, we really want to minimize the impact to other systems. And so there's some inherent patterns, around separation of concerns that kind of come into building these types of service-oriented composite solutions. So that if you make a change to the presentation layer or the business or workflow layer, you're not breaking the rest of the system. You're avoiding those traditional pitfalls. from a developer economics perspective, right, you're not reinventing the wheel over and over again, right? So you have now a catalog of applications that are published either internally or by the vendors that you're partnering with, and obviously enabling the shift from kind of this homogeneous approach that was really kind of a relic of the early 2000s, where you invest in Microsoft or you invest in Oracle or WebSphere, and it takes care of all of your needs. The web and the cloud has changed all that, right? So what we're really doing is shifting not even to heterogeneous interoperability, but polygynous interoperability, right? Where it's really a matter of not even thinking about the platform, and obviously behind the service you have to still think about some of the same things in terms of languages and whatnot. But in terms of the interoperability aspects, you don't care what platform the vendor is on. You need a single common denominator to enable those compositions. And as you move to the cloud and you start to enable these partner-vendor interactions, you can start to do so in a very rationalized, pragmatic manner, which is really something that customers are really in need of today, given the pressure to really take advantage of some of these capabilities. So let's take a look at what a typical hybrid composite scenario might look like, and we'll take the same theme of a reservation management system where on-premise, I might have a Windows workflow service that is running on Windows Server Fabric as a premier hosting environment, as an extension to IIS. It's going to give me things like hosting, persistence, monitoring, etc. And you might imagine that there's a call center that allows for customers to call in and make a reservation, as well as a web property that's a front end to this reservation system. And so the ability to accept and confirm a reservation is kind of the business process root, and that root of the process just happens to live on premise, which is pretty common because there's a number of applications and assets that form that system of record layer that quite frankly aren't moving to the cloud anytime soon, right? So what I want to be able to do is accept those reservations, but then I need to get those reservations out to restaurants in the field, right? To let them know that there's a reservation that's been made for their location, so they can prepare and make sure that they have the necessary resources. There might be an approval process that goes into that. So the customer might make a reservation request for certain things, certain menu items. Maybe they're having a large party, and so it might be a two-phased process where there's an approval needed to make sure that the restaurant can accommodate that. In addition to that, the home office for the restaurant, back in corp, right, needs to have visibility to the reservations that are happening. What's the rate of occupancy? What reservations are actually being fulfilled? How many reservations are being canceled at the last minute, and how can they, agilely and dynamically kind of ensure that they can make up for those deltas? And so the idea might be that you have some services or a service hosted in Windows Azure, for example, that's responsible for ensuring that it never loses a reservation, right? So when a reservation is requested through the workflow service on-premise, that reservation then can basically be distributed in a durable, guaranteed delivery manner to the restaurants in the field. And so that might be a combination of maybe having a WCF service running in a web role and using service bus queues or topics, right, to make sure that when that reservation is submitted, it then basically gets published onto the service bus by a highly available service that then ensures that when the restaurants that may, by the way, be occasionally connected depending on bandwidth network constraints, eventually receive that message, right? And you might want to do that in parallel, right? You might want to have a multicasting here where both the home office that might be running BizTalk server because they want to ensure that CRM or SAP or some other system of record is updated, as well as having some lightweight infrastructure just enough to be able to receive those reservation events. And so what you see here is really traditional network and trust boundaries really starting to get blurred, right, as a result of the advancements in these capabilities that we're going to cover here throughout the rest of the discussion. So what are the biggest challenges in building a solution like what I've described, which is quite simple to put together some fancy slides? Well, first of all, it's performance and scale, right? We want to make sure that we can handle the reservations, that we're never missing reservations. If the website is down or the processing of the reservation is not available due to a saturation, well, that's actually dollars on the line, right? When it comes to bridging the gaps between how do I maintain communication with both the home office and these restaurants that may be anywhere out in the field. We want to think about things like enabling long-running services, right? Such that there's the ability to handle, an approval process that might happen, seconds, minutes, days, hopefully no more than that, or we're going to have some hungry customers that are upset. But enabling these long-running business processes. And then designing for reliability and scalability and being open to change, right? So we'll look at how a model-oriented approach can really help to enable that. And then again, addressing the forces and the tensions that actually make composition across firewalls and NAT, network address translation and software firewalls, quite difficult, right? For good reasons, right? You want to keep the bad guys out, but we also need a way to let the good guys in to enable these systems of differentiation and innovation. So when we look at the platform as it exists today, there's really kind of three pillars that enable these outcomes through a variety of capabilities. Windows Server App Fabric is an extension to IIS, has a number of capabilities that you may not even be aware of. First of all, if you're building enterprise services using WCF or Workflow 4 or 4.5, Windows Server App Fabric is a no-brainer in terms of allowing you to host and manage your services as more than just an ASP.NET or web application. Support for caching to enable some of these scalability scenarios. The ability to auto-start your services to take care of some configuration that you might otherwise look at NT services to do. Enabling long-running workflows, so providing the persistence infrastructure for workflow services without you having to stand up your own database and wire that up through a lot of cumbersome configuration. Monitoring and ease of management. BizTalk Server, still today best-in-class platform or product for traditional EAI capabilities, right? If you need to integrate with SAP, CRM, Dynamics AX, PeopleSoft, JD Edwards, there really isn't a better tool set in the stack. Same is true for vertical accelerators. If you need to apply HIPAA from a regulatory perspective, or doing HL7 transactions, for example, that's exactly what BizTalk is designed to do. And now with Windows Azure, we have alternative hosting environment, alternative backing store and persistence mechanisms, the ability to bridge on-premise and cloud through Service Bus Relay and brokered messaging, and a very functional approach to enabling claim-based security through the access control services. So together, what we're really talking about is a platform that is enabling these composite scenarios like never before, while still making sure that we're focusing and providing the attention required to systems of record, right? Your cost of doing business, but unlocking that potential and enabling the systems of differentiation, the systems of innovation in a much quicker manner to deliver time to value. And that's really kind of the promise of composite applications to begin with. Let's actually take a closer look at how we resolve some of these tensions. So when we think about performance and scale, right, some of the challenges on-premise or in the cloud really is around latency, database round trips. We still can't just keep adding server after server after server, right? At some point, it just doesn't scale anymore. And caching is one of the things that's kind of a quick hit win to really reduce that latency and deliver performance to the end user, who at the end of the day is your sole judge of performance, right? Developers get into a lot of conversations around performance and they tend to pre-optimize a lot. The reality is that nobody cares about performance unless it's bad, right? And typically a customer is going to judge, or an end user is going to judge performance in a very simple way. If they click a button or a link or request some activity and it takes more than about 3 seconds, the impression they're going to walk away from is that performance is kind of sluggish. And in today's day and age, where we're fighting actually to actually retain the attention of a customer, right? Where you have app stores now where you may be one of several products, and it doesn't take much to influence that customer's perception of your solution without them really even clicking beyond 1 or 2 activities. As I mentioned, kind of a proof point in terms of how hardware costs have really reached commodity levels. If you look at the cost per megabyte of memory and storage through the 80s and 90s, what you see is that today, in 2012, memory and storage is almost free, right? And so what that means is that the ability to actually stand up a server with processing power and memory that even 2 or 3 years ago would have been somewhat of a cost prohibitive thing, those barriers aren't really there anymore. Now the management overhead of managing those servers still exists. I think about my own phone that has a gigahertz of processing power and more memory today than my PC had 5 years ago, right? So it's really pretty significant what we're witnessing. What I want to do is jump into a demo that just kind of shows some of the key capabilities around server app fabric caching to give you an idea of some of the performance benefits that you can get both on-premise and in the cloud, but we'll focus on-premise for the purposes of this demo with Windows Server App Fabric caching. So let me just go ahead and jump in to my VM here, if I'm lucky. And so what I have here actually, pardon me just 1 second here. Okay. That looks like my VM may have rebooted throughout the talk, which is great. So, all right, let me just go, give me just 1 moment here. Just go ahead and pull up my solution here. So in keeping with our travel and hospitality theme, what we have is a fictitious web property that allows customers to browse and book travel. And so as a customer, if I click on the About page, I'll see a list of destinations. And so to be fair, I'm going to go ahead and refresh this a couple times. What we'll see is that we're seeing about let's be generous and say an average of 140, 50 milliseconds of latency. Now the reason for that is that we're going directly to the database for every time that we want to load that list, and there's some latency involved, right? It's not too bad, but as you start to scale and you get more users concurrently, that can certainly start to become a problem. So what I want to show you is the capabilities that are offered with Windows Server App Fabric caching, which is similar to the capabilities in Windows Azure today. And we'll see why can't seem to get Visual Studio up and running. And what I want to walk you through is the impact of actually enabling caching and then highlight some new capabilities in Windows Server Fabric 1.1 that actually came out earlier this year. So we'll let Visual Studio here open up and jump into that. In the meantime, what I'll do here is go ahead and open up IIS. All right, and let me just go ahead and apologize. My VM is behaving extremely sluggishly right now. Let me just go ahead and launch the solution here. And while I do that, I'll go ahead and launch a separate instance. Interestingly, I had all of this set up, but it is a demo, so it's essential that that they're challenged to make sure I'm earning my living here. Okay, so here we are in an MVC application. We don't have time to really dig into it too deeply. But what we can see here is that we're just using some simple link here to pull out the list of destinations from the database. And so obviously there's no data caching involved here. If I go ahead and comment this out, what I can do is improve upon that significantly by taking advantage of Windows Server App Fabric Cache. Windows Server App Fabric caching is provided by installing Windows Server App Fabric. It's completely free. And the latest version, as I mentioned, is 1.1. When you do that, you basically get a library that allows you to put items into a cache and retrieve them. And the cache is actually highly distributed, right? So there's some redundancy and high availability built into that, which is very different from what you're going to get from session state or even out of process session providers like ASP.NET or SQL Server. So the code here is very similar except for one thing, and that is that I'm actually going to check to see if my cache is in, if my cache key is in the cache, and the name of that here is airports. I'm going to give it the cache name. And if it's null, then I'm going to go ahead and take that hit of pulling back the list of airports from the database one time, and I'm going to go ahead and populate the cache with that data. But the next time that I actually hit the request for the list of airports by calling this method here, get cache airports, I'm going to basically save that whole round trip, right? So let's actually take a look at that. If I pop back in here and hit F5, the first time we're going to see this huge jump, right? Because we're actually restarting the process in the app domain. And so we'll give it a minute to go ahead and refresh here. And then what we'll see is that subsequent refreshes, right, we're down to like 7 to 9 milliseconds, which is pretty significant, right? That's a direct impact to your customer experience. We can actually improve upon that, though. One of the features in Server App Fabric 1.1 is the ability to support a feature called read-through. And what that does is the developer reduces the amount of code that you actually have to write to really 3 lines here. So the only thing really happening here that's similar to the previous code is that I still have to provide a cache key and provide the name of the cache that I've created, but I don't have to worry about checking to see if it's there, and if it is, going ahead and populating it. All of that's basically built in. And the way that you do that in Server App Fabric 1.1 is by implementing a data cache store provider. And I won't go into a lot of details here, but what we've done here is implemented a custom cache provider, which basically means that a developer does this once, and then at that point in time, the ability to cache frequently used objects is reusable by all developers. So the experience for the developer that really just wants to take advantage of caching isn't 15 lines of code, it's 3 lines of code, right? And when we enable that, what we see is that we're still seeing the cache being fully utilized. Now, to keep myself fully honest, if we had more time, what I would actually do is tear down this cache and then basically show that the factory is rebuilding it. But for the purposes of time, we'll move on from that. So that's server app fabric caching in action. So let's jump into the second kind of tension, which is, so how do you build these apps, right? So caching is cool. It's going to add some immediate value to your applications. How do we kind of enable the scenario that I showed in that slide? So some of the challenges with composite apps is you want to write the app once. You want to be able to run it both on-premise and in the cloud. Deployment can be a challenge in both environments. You need to think about supporting reliable, long-running business processes while managing costs, right? You can't just leave a service idle waiting for someone to come in and approve a reservation, right? You want to be able to save those resources and resuscitate the workflow when something interesting happens. The reality is that there's tension between dev and ops, right? So we need to really reduce that. There's a whole DevOps movement that you might be aware of that's happening right now that really is poised to eliminate a lot of those barriers. And we'll talk about how Server App Fabric and Web Deploy help that. Monitoring and troubleshooting is difficult, right? I mean, 10 years ago when we were building two-tier apps, right, or n-tier web apps, chances are you had your presentation layer, you had your business components, and then you had a database, right? And it was pretty simple. Today, we're talking about all these benefits that composition brings to the business and IT, but it's never been more challenging to actually get a feel for what's going on, right? So when your customer tells you that there's a bug or there's something happening, how do you know where to start, right? So monitoring and troubleshooting on composite applications is more important than ever before. So when you think about n-tier, as I mentioned, typically this is what we're talking about. In terms of scale out and meeting, some of the challenges, you can add more and more servers, but you can only do so so much. And if you have built an application that doesn't scale on-premise, I can promise you that it's not going to scale in the cloud, right? If there's fundamental issues with the way in which you've addressed your layers and your separation of concerns, you're going to have problems, right? So it really is kind of a maturity thing that we need to think about. So one of the things that we really recommend is to, first of all, only build services that are going to have value to the organization, right? Direct business value. And when you do that, you're really talking about driving value from the middle out. This is really nothing new, but think about what are the drivers from a business perspective, and then figure out what assets exist and what assets need to be exposed and then composed, as well as new assets need to be delivered, and then actually define that in a way that allows you to really stay focused on those business outcomes. In today's modern application development landscape, as I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, right, it's not just enough to put out a SOAP or a REST head, right? You need to think about how am I going to enable multi-channel integration across my services, and how are my services also inherently units of composition across other services and other APIs. And so when you think about the new service-oriented design, you're really thinking about exposing your resources, your transactions, your operations across a variety of different channels, and really thinking about how you can enable these composite scenarios with the right tooling and the right capabilities within your service interface, business, and resource layer, which again is not only database, right? It's now services being a fundamental unit of composition. Composition requires SOA, right? It requires a service-oriented way of thinking, both on the inside in terms of your development patterns and on the outside. So there's kind of this trend around composite fabrics, right, where services are the unit of deployment. There's autonomy, there's reuse as the service as that unit of reuse, and so it changes the way that we actually manage services, right? So if we're doing the right things on the inside from a loose coupling, separation of concerns perspective, and we're doing the right things from an interoperability perspective, well, now we have basically services that are running somewhere, right? Need to be managed by somebody. They require resources to be allocated. They obviously want to leverage the best economies of scale, and so you need a way to actually manage those services in a tenable manner. And one of the nice things about the Windows Server App Fabric dashboard as an extension to IIS is it actually brings services into the forefront as first-class citizens in IIS, right? So you're thinking about things like services and endpoints, which I'll demonstrate here briefly in the next demo. I want to be able to see, how many errors has my WCF service thrown? What is the state of my workflow instances? How many workflow instances have actually succeeded versus failed? How many are idle, waiting for some input? Right? These are things that in a composite world you really need to have visibility to, and that's really one of the nice things that adding Server App Fabric to IIS on-premise provides. The thing to remember is that there's a curve, right, in terms of taking advantage of these capabilities, right? You can't go from writing simple database-driven web applications to the cloud tomorrow, right? There is a progression in terms of changing your thinking around service enablement, and hybrid is actually the perfect way to start to take advantage of that, right? As your maturity on-premise increases and you want to start to take advantage of offloading some of these workloads to the cloud, hybrid is the way to enable that, right? Where your business processes are spanning both on-premise and the cloud. And there's a video here in which my colleague David Pullman and I were interviewed by Microsoft, and we talk about that, and we can certainly make this available to you as well. So we're running a little bit short on time. We started, I think, about 7 after the hour, and so I'm going to go for about 10 more minutes and jump into kind of what we're talking about in terms of building these composite solutions. So I have a workflow service that represents that ability to accept and process a reservation. So if you think about the slide with the bottom left-hand corner where we're accepting those reservations, we're going to show how you might do that using a workflow service and what that would look like in terms of being able to compose assets that reside both on-premise and in the cloud. So what I have here is basically a state machine. State machine is one of the many activities that are available, including flowchart, sequence for composing your applications, your services in whatever way feels natural to you. And what you can see here very briefly is that having not a lot of depth in the domain, it's pretty clear kind of what's happening here, right? I have a start state. I can be in one of 3 states, right? I can receive the reservation, at which point I'm transitioning into the confirmation state. There's a processing activity that happens, and based on the outcome of that, the reservation is either complete because it wasn't confirmed, or it was confirmed, in which case I want to go ahead and dispatch that reservation to my service running in the cloud so that the restaurant and court can actually get visibility to that. And if we look inside of each of these activities, I click on the received activity, what you see is that I'm actually nesting a workflow sequence activity. And a workflow sequence activity is going to allow me to receive that reservation request from my end user, which might be a call center agent, might be a user interacting with a web user experience. And there's a couple of things that are going on here, right? I'm having received that reservation request. I'm going to request the reservation using a custom activity. If I bring up my workflow toolbox, you can see that I have a number of custom activities that I've written. I want to be able to send a notification to the user letting them know that we've received the reservation, and then I also want to be able to provide a response to whatever application, whatever that presentation layer was that interacted with me as a service might be. And if I step back here using this nice little crumb trail, I can see that when we go into confirmation, what I'm actually doing is waiting for that second message that maybe the maitre d' or the director of reservations sends in to say, yep, we can accommodate this request, we have the resources, we have the capacity, let's go ahead and make it happen. And now when that happens, what we're really talking about is now moving into a processing state. And that processing state is also, in this case, facilitated by a sequence activity. It could have been a flow chart. There's a number of options that I have. And here what I'm actually using for anybody that's done BizTalk before is a mapper activity, which is relatively new, which allows me to take the incoming schema and map it to an outbound schema. And what I'm basically doing here is that based on the status, right, on the outcome of that long-running process in which a second party, approved or rejected the reservation, I'm actually, based on whether that was confirmed or not, changing the comments to either a message indicating that we look forward to serving the patron, or unfortunately we could not accommodate that request. Now, obviously this is a trivial example that gives you an idea of the capabilities that are really coming together, such that you don't have to use BizTalk server in a BizTalk hosting environment to take advantage of the mapper. You can take advantage of these capabilities at the platform layer now to enable these compositions. And the last thing that happens is that if the director of reservations confirms that reservation, what I need to do is actually dispatch that now to my processing step, which happens to be a service that lives in Windows Azure, right? And that WCF service hosted in Windows Azure is responsible for accepting that reservation request and then playing it to a service bus queue or topic, to which one or more restaurants and home office actually subscribe to. Now, if you'll remember, the home office is actually leveraging BizTalk server because it cares about reservations when they happen. Maybe it wants to integrate with CRM or SAP or some other ERP. So we've thought about, how do we bring BizTalk into the fold to be able to consume messages from an App Fabric service bus or an Azure service bus, queue or topic. And this dispatch reservation activity actually is nothing more than a workflow activity as a proxy to being able to consume the actual WCF service running in Windows Azure. So if we take a look at that, you'll see that we have a send and receive reply. So it's a request response proxy, but you don't see a bunch of C#, right? You see a workflow service. a workflow activity, which is now a composition as part of the overall workflow, which as far as the workflow is concerned, is just another activity that it's composing. In fact, if we look at the web.config file, and we scroll down here, what you can see is that the endpoint that activity is consuming is a WCF service that resides on Windows Azure. And fortunately, for demo purposes, that still is running as well. So that's kind of the idea with workflow. What I want to do now is, I've got some more slides. I'm going to skip those because we are running a little bit short on time. And I want to just kind of move to actually showing this thing in action. So what I'm going to do here is pull up my workflow service that I have hosted here in IIS with the App Fabric extension. And if I go into Content Review here and I browse it, I should see a WSDL page for my workflow service, which is great. And now what I want to do is use one of my favorite tools. That's pretty big. Use one of my favorite tools, WCF Test Client. Oh, wrong command prompt. And go ahead and bring up just a simple way to exercise that service. And we'll go ahead and provide some information here. So we'll say that we're going to choose American as the restaurant type, foreign party. So Amy Nelson, who was kind enough to host us today, is dining, making a reservation for 4, and that is going to happen tonight at, I'm told, 8 p.m. because she doesn't get out work until late because she's such a hard worker. And so what I'm going to do is actually invoke this now, and what I expect to get back is a confirmation number that basically gives me a way to track that reservation back, right? And when I do that, what I expect also is to actually see an email that went out to the patron, in this case a simulation thereof, to Amy, letting Amy know that we've received the reservation and it has been assigned, right? And then from there, what I want to be able to do is take this confirmation number and go ahead and process the reservation. Now I'm the director of reservations. I can accommodate Amy's request. I change that to confirmed and invoke it. This is a one-way message from a workflow perspective. Keep in mind that workflow now is sending a message to a WCF service that resides in Windows Azure. That WCF service is then going to write that request, that reservation request, to the service bus, and then there's going to be the consumption of that from both BizTalk and the actual restaurant. So let's actually take a look at that. In my mail folder, if everything went well, I have a second message now, and that message indicates that the reservation has been accepted, confirmed, and we look forward to serving Amy. I also want to be able to grab that reservation the next time that the restaurant has connectivity. This is something that inherently Service Bus gives us. So let me go ahead and actually open up the restaurant, which now comes back online, and what I should see is that that reservation eventually comes in, and there it is. Reservation request for Amy Nelson has, with 4 guests, has been received. In addition to that, I want my BizTalk process to be able to receive that reservation so it can update CRM. And if I go look inside of my folder here and hit refresh, it should be there. Typically, if it's not, it can only mean one thing, and that is that my BizTalk host instance might not be running. So let's actually take a look at that. Definitely getting all the good demo gremlins today. Let me just go ahead into my BizTalk server admin console. Going to host instances. Wonderful. Let's start. And momentarily, I should see the receipt of that reservation and the corresponding mapping taking place to a fictitious record that would then be consumed by CRM or whatever the downstream system is. So again, keep in mind that I've got BizTalk server running. It's also capable of reading off of a queue from Azure Service Bus. And what I have now is a very simple transformation into whatever canonical schema that downstream system or record system expects for this reservation. So I apologize that we ran over somewhat. The fact that my VM apparently rebooted definitely introduced some delays. But I think the summary here worth sharing is that there are a number of capabilities that are available both on-premise through Windows Server App Fabric, WCF, Workflow, WCF and workflow services, you can build applications that run great on-prem and in the cloud. If you're working with Server App Fabric, you're going to get things like dashboarding, better event logging, the ability to actually manage and monitor your services as services, not just another web application. And Azure Service Bus is really kind of the key enabler to these hybrid composite solutions, right? As you saw, I had a application that receives reservations that is occasionally connected, right? It wasn't online when that reservation was dispatched. I brought the application online and it received the reservation. And DiskTalk Server, which is running on-premise behind the firewall as well, also received the reservation information in the context that some downstream system of record service is interested in. So that's really kind of the idea of composing across these traditional trust and network boundaries. A couple of things I'll share, some upcoming features. So BizTalk 2010 R2 has been announced, as has Azure Integration Services, which is really kind of the next evolution in terms of platform alignment for BizTalk, and some exciting capabilities coming to Service Bus around EAI, EDI, and enabling line of business integration. There's a number of resources that I would definitely point you to if you want to learn more about WCF Workflow, Azure, and App Fabric. We have a number of webcasts that we've actually done in the last 12 months that cover these technologies that obviously we've looked at a very high level, like WCF, Workflow Services, Server App Fabric, etc. If you're interested in learning more about hybrid composition and how it might help you enable some of these transformational solutions, we'd be more than happy to talk to you. We're also offering briefings. If you are interested in that, you can follow up with Amy Nelson to sit down with one of our architects and have a 90-minute to half a day conversation on how the platform can be aligned to enable the outcomes that you're after. There's some new things, as I mentioned, that are coming up, including .NET 4.5 and Service Bus integration services. I've got demos, samples, and more information to kind of curated resources on my blog at rickgaribay.net. And with that, I want to thank you for your time. I do apologize for running over, but hopefully it was worth your while. For those of you that had to drop off, as Amy said, this will be available following the live webcast. If you have any questions, you can follow up with Amy or Katie or myself, or on Twitter at Rick G. Garibay anytime. Be happy to continue the conversation. With that, I'll pass it over to Amy, and thank you all very much for your time.
Great. Thank you, Rick, for that great presentation, and thank you all for those who have stuck on over the time. What I'm going to do really quick is jump through a few polling questions, and for those of you that are still on, I greatly appreciate your feedback. The first question, was this content helpful for your business? Yes or no? All right, thank you. The next question. Please rate the presentation content, excellent, good, or poor. All right, thanks. And the last one I have is, would you like us to schedule a follow-up, yes or no? Again, thank you all for joining this webcast. We will be forwarding the link to view a recording of this webcast once it does become available, and it will also be on our website at neudesic.com. Again, thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you in the next webcast. You are now free to disconnect.